Now, if you've been following any bit of news lately, then you've probably been stricken with some depression over the recent debates about gun control. And at this point, the debate is kind of like beating a dead horse that's been shot a few times by an AR-15, then wrapped in the fleece made of the Second Amendment and buried at sea by the NRA. Though as fun as it is to argue with people on Facebook, this whole situation can be boiled down to the meaning of 27 words. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And yet, for years, these 27 brief words have been a source of severe contention, seen by some as an inalienable protection against tyranny, by others as a dangerous anachronism. And that, my friends, is the problem. Hey guys, I'm Ryan, and if you like hearing the news but you don't want to be so serious about it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Now, this is not going to be a debate about gun laws or what I think is right or wrong about the laws we already have in place, rather the challenge we have in interpreting what is already the law of the land. One of the challenges in interpreting a centuries-old document is the fact that words change and diverge. So before everyone starts calling me naive and stupid, I want to know, what do you guys think the Founding Fathers meant in the Second Amendment? And for you foreign viewers, what do you guys think about our constant bickering? I know I'm annoyed. Leave a comment down below. Now, firstly, when looking at this statement, we must ask ourselves, what in the sweet Lord's bosom is a militia? Well, at the time of the American Revolutionary War, militias were groups of able-bodied men who protected their towns, colonies, and eventually states. In other words, a well-regulated state-based institution. But Ryan, what does it mean to be well-regulated? I think that well-regulated in the 18th century tended to be something like well-organized, well-disciplined, and trained, so that the instance of stabbing one's eye out with a bayonet would not happen on the regular. It didn't mean regulate in the sense that we use it now, such as how Utah regulates its liquor alcohol levels to the equivalent of dirty tap water. There's been a nuance there. In other words, it didn't mean that the state was controlling the militia in any certain way, rather that the militia was ready to do its duty. Comparatively today, the National Guard is the closest thing we have to a well-regulated militia. So sadly, not a couple of your buddies with the gun collecting habit that sometimes do Civil War reenactments. Two different things. The phrase "a well-regulated militia" remains one of the most cited and argued parts of the sentence, but it most definitely was a framework for security. To get that, let's go back to history class and see what it was like in the United States at that time. The country had just fought a war, won its independence, and was expanding west, taking what was rightfully not theirs. There were plenty of reasons to feel unsafe, and so security had a very palpable meaning. The idea of a state militia would also be attractive because at the time, if government forces tried to take over land or overstep their boundaries, you'd have an institution in place, the militia, that would outnumber any army. Now today, there are people out there with this very same fear that the government is one day going to come in and take, well, everything. And I'm not going to say you're wrong if you feel that way. I'm just going to say maybe you're a little bit overprotective. And in my family, we call this fear Crazy Uncle Pete, who sits amongst his years of hoarded magazines and newspapers with his shotgun and oxygen tank from smoking 30 years of low-end cigarettes, constantly trailing off about how the US government is going to rise up and steal his speedboat that hasn't seen water in 20 years. Of course, with the modern size and scope of the US military, and the fact that militias as we know it no longer exist, the notion is hard to imagine today. Yeah, I'm not gonna put my luck into rocking chair confined Uncle Pete. Another highly contested area is the idea of rights and what kind of rights the framers of the Constitution were referring to in this amendment. When I think of rights, for better or for worse, I think of them as exemptions and regulations. The framers definitely believed in natural rights, such as the freedom of religion, free speech, property, and more. However, the framers didn't talk about the right to bear arms as one of the set of natural rights in that sense, though I think it would be historically accurate to say that the Founding Fathers recognized a certain right to self-defense. Now we get to the juicy part. Who are the people whom have these rights, you may be asking? Well, when you say people, you tend to mean an individual person. But if you go to Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, as you know I did, it says that the House of Representatives will be chosen by the people who are the persons who are entitled to exercise the right to vote. Now, what that very confusing statement means is that you can use the term people to imply a collective mass. And we need to think that you can also exclude certain people as well. After all, when the Constitution was written, slaves were considered property and women weren't allowed to vote. Sadly, some people still think that this should be the case. A more basic question would be, by people, is the Second Amendment referring to people as private entities or as participants in a militia? This brings us to the phrase everyone gets a knot in their panties about: to keep and bear arms. The question we should ask is, what arms and what is the scope of bearing arms. In the case District of Columbia versus Heller, the Supreme Court decided the rights outlined by the Second Amendment did apply specifically to the possession of firearms for purposes of self-defense. One thing people disagree about is whether or not assault weapon bans are constitutional. They also disagree about how we should interpret the Constitution in terms of history or in light of new technologies. Though personally, I think the framers would be kind of surprised at the conversations we're having today about bump stocks and AR-15s when they mostly had muskets and wore very pointy hats. Though we all have the natural right to self-defense, which people often cite as a reason for owning such weapons as an AR-15, knowing that, I would like to ask those individuals, do you really want to live in a state of being where you need to own such an assault rifle in order to feel safe? Or should we live in a world where we can feel safe, void of such a need to be armed in that way? And this is just personally what I think. If I need an assault weapon in order to sleep at night, then I may have a problem. Remember, that's just my opinion. It's food for thought. And most historians think that it would be remarkable news to the framers of the Second Amendment that they were actually constitutionalizing a personal right to self-defense, as opposed to trying to say something significant about the militia. Words like militia and rights are loaded with historical context and nuance that acts like a frickin' Chinese puzzle box to truth, leading even the best intentioned interpreters to different conclusions. Though if there was a clear answer, these 27 words wouldn't be so incendiary. Remember, I'm Ryan, and I'll see you guys in the next video.